Yeah. Oops.
Well, there we go. I'm Lynn McCright, and I'm the leader of our Austin area chapter, which is also the Central Texas chapter. And we have a lot of people who may be joining us in a few minutes, but we've got a few minutes of time that we could just use for our own conversation or any announcements that anyone would like to make. So we're open to either.
Lynn was just talking about, we have a retreat coming up November 8th and 9th. I don't remember. We used to do one every single year until COVID. And then, so our chapter has done a retreat or a conference every year since 2010. So we've tried to revamp that. So we are starting in November 8th and 9th. It's a weekend, a Friday and Saturday, a holistic nurses retreat in Mineral Wells. And that's a little town about 2 hours west of Fort Worth.
Right.
And they're trying to get their wellness destination designation. So one of our good friends, Carla Hay Purdue, has been working through the Chamber of Commerce and the City Council and all the people that in that city to make it a wellness destination. There's a criteria that you have to go through to make it that. It's kind of along the lines of a blue zone. And so she's been working with the local grocery stores, with different businesses to create that healthy environment for people, which also includes engaging the community. So she just put out her first video through the hospital on how to read a label for food. So I thought, go Carla. She looks great on camera. She did a wonderful job. And she's a board certified nurse coach. So she's making a huge difference in her town. So we picked that as our destination because as part of their revamp, they have a hotel called the Crazy Water Hotel, which is a remodel from an old historical hotel. So it has a little history, a little fun to it. And we thought it would be a great destination for us to all be part of that. So then we have I think we're finalizing the flyer in the next couple of days. So we'll be able to get it on the Nursing Network website so people can start purchasing. There are only 50 slots available because it's a small hotel. But the best part of all is Dr. Darlene Hess will be our keynote. And she is the lead author on the first edition of the Art and Science of Nurse Coaching Scope and Standards of Practice that we all had to use to take the board certification. So that's very exciting for me just to meet someone who's done so much work for nursing and is so willing to share her knowledge with us. So exciting.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Teresa, that it has to be set up through Nursing Network for the registration to begin. And I haven't been able to contact them. I don't know if she's on vacation or what. So
Okay.
it's
Well, as soon as it's in Nursing Network, you'll get an email. If you're signed up in Nursing Network, you'll get the email to
right,
register.
right. Well,
All
Lydia,
the behind
I, I just wonder if Lydia attended conference this year. We were not able to attend. Okay. No, no conference.
No, I wasn't, but I did the virtual of Sharon Birch's. Teresa, I saw you on there a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so that was great. That was fun to just see the different areas. Like a lot of the different areas already that nurses are working in. But I thought that was a really successful event that she put on. I thought that was very eye-opening for some who didn't know anything about anything other than your standard kind of how to be a nurse in a hospital. There's so many other things that you can do. So, but no, I wasn't able to go to that particular one, Lynn, that you're referring to.
We'll
So,
see you in Reno next year at the Peppermill Resort.
Yeah, I have a mentor that went out to that one and she loved it. She said
Oh,
it was
really?
really great. Yeah, really good feedback there. So she enjoyed it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Teresa, I definitely would invite you to introduce
Yes,
our guest
I
tonight. And
would
please
love to.
just be patient as people join our call tonight. And we look forward to um, how, thank you, Maggie, for coming tonight. We really look forward to hearing you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So I would like to introduce Maggie, and I want to read your bio because I could never remember all of that.
Well, please just summarize briefly. We don't need to read all the words.
We don't need to read all the words. Oh, okay. So Maggie is a registered nurse with over 2 decades as a frontline critical care nurse. She's dedicated to be an advocate for nurses. Her journey spans from level 1 ICUs, ERs, cath lab, and procedural areas to serving as a previous investigator with the Board of Nursing. Seeing nurses' challenges and complexities, Maggie founded Advocates for Nurses to offer education, advocacy, and support. Maggie's extensive background includes an academic journey as a ADN, then a BSN, then an MSN through a bridge program. She's been a critical care nurse for over 2 decades. She honed her skills in patient care and crisis management. As a Board of Nursing investigator, she gained valuable insights into the investigative process and trained in the CLEAR program, Council on Licensure, Enforcement, and Regulation. And now she is a legal nurse consultant, so she can help nurses with and their legal teams in case review and preparing reports and offering expertise in nursing practice standards. Her mission is to ensure nurses receive education, guidance, and advocacy as it pertains to due process. She offers personalized consultations, educational courses, and expert legal nurse consulting. Welcome, Maggie.
Why, thank you. And so let me just summarize that up. First
I
and
know.
foremost, I'm not a lawyer and I never give legal advice. I just have had a different journey than some other people. And just to touch on some of the things, I was a prior investigator. And so I think that most of us don't understand the rules and regulations that dictate our professional license. And I can assure you it was quite an awakening. I did not stay at that entity for very long because I did have concerns about what I felt was the lack of due process then, and which now I know, and I am pursuing law school because I do feel very passionate about the lack of due process that nurses extended, not only in our state, but across the United States. So thank you for that introduction. And kind of what brings me here and why Teresa and I crossed paths is because of my love for the nurses. And I do love alternative holistic medicine. And I have unfortunately seen nurses not only when I was not so much within agency, but for sure since I've been out. And even most recently, a nurse and a legal team reaching out because crossing over, do anything. If you decide to call yourself a nurse, then that state is giving you that privilege to call yourself that nurse, and you're always held to your highest level of education. If you choose to put that credentialing on anything that you do, you are held to that level of education, period, the end. And I think that's something that I don't think that people really realize. And then when possibly you might be doing some telehealth, let's just say, and now you're crossing over to state lines because the patient is in another state. And yes, you have a compact license, hopefully. If you don't, you need to understand the rules and regulations in that state. Are you calling yourself a nurse? Are you calling yourself a coach? Because if you don't have a license in that state, could you walk into that state and walk into a building and practice? Because some of the telehealth stuff, even that was passed during the pandemic, they have lifted. Some of that stuff is no longer in existence. Every governor had to overturn things to put things in place, even to the extent of no in-personal clinicals. I don't think a lot of us realize that every governor in every state had to overpass some of those things. So including that, and now we're talking about telehealth, which is still something relatively new. You know, I mean, is there a lot of rules and regulations around this? And now these boards don't speak to one another. That can be a little bit tricky. And now you're standing in front of an entity and you're asking for due process about something that's not maybe well researched or understood. So I think that that's one of the big things to take into consideration. Understanding your scope, that when you're in a different state, you have to adhere to those to your level of education. If you're a nurse practitioner and you're working in a state where you have to you have to work with a doctor, you have to make sure that you have that in place. You have to make sure that if you're doing stuff across state lines, that that's in place wherever you're working. And I just want to touch on as well, just because you choose to call yourself a coach never absolves you of your highest level of education. You cannot do anything grossly negligent, even if you choose to call yourself a coach, because you do have that level of education, training, and knowledge. And during civil, criminal, or even board of nursing, you know, litigation, that will all come to fruition. So touching on that as well, the appropriate use of titles. So in your signature, on your website, any social media platforms that you have out there, just making sure that your title reflects and the language on there reflects your actual credentialing, and that you're not misrepresenting yourself. I have unfortunately seen that. I'm sure you guys have heard about this in the media. You know, one instance, I believe a nurse practitioner got her NP or had passed the test, but the board is the one who gives you that licensure. I don't think that was fully into place yet. She got reported to the board of nursing because the clinic had put her stuff up on the website, and she had not had it in her hand yet. And she got, and even the process of being investigated, right? Even if it goes away, can just be a very, very stressful process. So not only your signature, I know it seems maybe a little bit ridiculous, but have a badge, really honestly, because then that's just, now that's producible. I wore a badge. So some of it may be for optics, right? But what are some of the complaints that patients often say in general? When I walk into any healthcare organization, I don't know who that person is. I don't know who that person is. So here you are, you put it on something, and then every time, until you have a really established relationship, like you can, oh, hey, Sally, like you know, you have, you know, that true nurse patient relationship. I would just say, remember, you know, I'm a doctor of nursing, right? You know, I'm a doctor nurse, and making sure that you're reiterating whatever your credentialing is to the, I'm just the, not just, I don't say that because I'm an RN, but I'm an RN, just to make sure you understand what my level of education is, and making sure that you're following that up with, you know, maybe even a door sign just on your desk, anywhere that's front facing that patients would see, even at the check-in desk. Some of that seems extensive, but it is the small percentage of nurses that come that are investigated and know that's all shows prudency. So even some of those minor things as well, you can say, I had those in place. Everyone could see those. It's producible in a picture. I did not misrepresent myself. It was here. They signed something. I told them I had a badge. How much more prudent could one person be? So that, you know, that's, I think those are all good things to have in place. Informed consent, unless you're a licensed independent practitioner, unless you're an NP, even as an MSN, I cannot provide informed consent to a patient. That's not within my scope of practice because I'm an RN. I cannot provide informed consent to a patient. Now, if I'm performing a procedure as an RN, say I'm putting in a PICC line, can I do informed consent with the patient? Yes, I'm doing that specific procedure, but that's going to be very limited when you're talking about an RN giving informed consent to anything. Nancy Brent and the Law, I read from this book all the time. I highly suggest, she talks about this. This is a $20 book. I think every nurse should own it. AMA 2.1 is informed consent. Our state does have stuff around. I don't know the code for that from the medical board, but it is written there. Every state, more often than not, has patient rights. Our state does. And so knowing all those things, we do not provide informed consent as an RN, as a LPN, unless you're a licensed independent practitioner. You need to make sure that you're following those guidelines if you're doing that.
Maggie, I'm sorry, what was the name of that book? I didn't catch that.
Sure. Nurses in the Law. It's Nancy Brent RN JD. So she's a nurse attorney. And honestly, I think the second edition is $30 and the first edition is roughly like $10 or $15. This is not an unaffordable book and really is just a great reference for any nurse to have. I think having a solid contract in place, just like when you go to the hospital or the clinic, they have you sign some form of, contract. I'm a nurse. I'm not providing you medical advice. If you're an RN, if you're an NP and you're whatever that you're doing, whatever service you're providing, that it's identified in there, especially if you're deviating from the quote unquote, what they're saying the standard of care is, right? We don't get to decide some of those things. Some of that's just dictated for us. And if you deviate from that, you just have to make sure that whatever services that you're providing, especially as a nurse, that you can back that up with stuff in a contract. You're giving them additional education about maybe a supplement. But as an RN, and I know I keep touching back because that's oftentimes I see the RNs that, for obvious reasons, because they're not providers or prescribers, are the ones that get reported to a board of nursing because the medical board does have a duty to protect the public. And when nurses put stuff out there, and I just saw this 6 weeks ago again, you have to make sure that that language mirrors what your scope is. And so touching back on the contract, making sure that the agreement, AKA the contract that you have with the client, the patient, in whatever role or capacity that you're choosing to work in as a nurse or a coach, just aligns with whatever agreement that you're making. So it's a level of protection for you. I do highly suggest you have legal counsel look at it at least once when you're opening up your practice. Ideally an RN, JD, a nurse attorney, but any administrative or policy, healthcare policy lawyer would be able to look at that for you. But just make sure that you're getting with a lawyer to set up that stuff when you're opening up a practice. And when you're opening up a practice or you're doing practices, making sure that you have some form of policy, procedures that are in place that can be subpoenaed. As the investigator, those were the things that I was generating to not only, so you as the provider, right? So you as the license holder, but then to the business owner, you may be both of those. So you will have to produce stuff within your company, policies, procedures that you're adhering to, whatever those may be. You're working and you're suggesting supplements or certain medications. You just have to make sure that the really big on the educational piece and that you're providing that evidence-based information. For nurse practitioners, if you need to know if you're supposed to have a collaborative provider. As an RN, you're not ordering labs, you're not reviewing labs, you're not giving suggestions on what labs need to be to a certain degree. Now, can I do a situation background assessment recommendation? Can I do an SBAR? I sure can, but I have to make sure that that would be a policy that I have in place. And then I would be providing for anything that I would be telling the client as an RN, not necessarily as an MP, XYZ that aligns with whatever the evidence-based practice is. But you have to make sure that as the nurse, that you're adhering to whatever that is. And then I highly suggest having the collaborative physician to look over that stuff, or provider, even as the RN, and say you're choosing again to have a practice where like you're recommending, you're doing some form of IV therapy and you're recommending supplements, and I'm trying to think of some of the ones that, you know, are that go on the purview that somehow pop up. A lot of it's the IV therapy that I've seen a lot, especially if you're trying to mix or compound drugs. Like now you're involving the board of pharmacy. So another collaboration that you would want to have, another layer if you choose to do that. So on top of your evidence-based science, you're pulling in maybe an MD if you're an RN doing this, even an NP, depending on, you know, the state that you're in, and making sure that your collaborative doctor is looking over all the medications that you're giving, that you're ordering. And then that board of pharmacy or that pharmacist is your collaborative as well, to making sure if you're mixing drugs, compounding anything, that you're just adhering to those rules and those regulations. Two more things just to, as I finish up, the continuing, well, three things: continuing education. I heard you guys reference some, you know, accrediting bodies, making sure that whatever certifications or additional credentialing you have, that if something was subpoenaed, that if you're supposed to have 30 hours at XYZ, they're just making sure that you have 30 hours at XYZ, that not only for your RN, but your additional layer of education as a coach. I heard you reference like certified coach. If that requires, you know, additional education, just making sure that you have those, and then keep those in an organized place. So if you are audited, that you can just pull those. And then boundary issues, we'll go back to the IV therapy. So now you're seeing your family in your clinic. Those are boundary issues that you need to be really careful with, because have I seen people reported? And yes, there are clear rules and regulations as that pertains when you're giving care to loved ones, because it ultimately affects your judgment. So that can be a boundary issue. So maybe someone else in your practice outside of something life-saving, because I don't want to discriminate. If your loved one is in front of you and they're suicidal or homicidal and you need to secure their safety, that's different, right? Or you're doing something life-saving, then that's different. You know what I mean? To save them, you know, but other than that, that's a boundary issue, and you should probably have someone else, you know, see them or manage their care. And then last but not least, professional liability insurance. I cannot recommend this enough, and I highly suggest start with your own car or home insurance. Oftentimes they underwrite for these, and they're more than happy to take your money. And you oftentimes get a discount because you already have services with them. And so they'll extend you an additional discount. Just tell them the additional things that you do. I'm a nurse practitioner, I'm an RN. These are the things that I do. And then also ask as well, do you underwrite for a RN, for an LPN, for a nurse practitioner? And would you pay for them if I would to be investigated, involved in civil litigation? It won't cover you for criminal, but some insurances don't underwrite more often than not for the RN and the LPN, normally always for the LIP, for the NP. But just make sure that you ask that question, especially if you're an RN or you're an LPN. So I think I got a little long-winded there, so I do tend to speak pretty fast. So thank you. I hope that was informational, and if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer some questions.
Maggie, thank you so much. That was a lot of information, and I think I really liked that you lined out like being careful with your practice, making sure that you're showing everyone who and what you're doing. I had never thought about putting a sign up somewhere, we have badges, but, um, I'm not sure that I've ever seen someone who's in charge at work that wasn't in leadership that had a name placard anywhere, It was not even something I ever thought about. Um, I'm curious what
it's-
go ahead.
Well, I was going to wonder if it's virtual, is it enough? Like you've got your name listed there, Maggie, and your credentials listed right there on your screen?
And then take it up a notch, make a Canva background as well, because now that's producible, right?
Right.
And the other thing that you can do is just snap a picture of it, put it in a little folder as part of the development of your practice. And then again, that's time stamped and dated. This is my Zoom. This is what, I have. My credentialing was clearly listed. I did verbally explain that to the patient as well. And then when you say virtual, would there ever, would there be also some written agreements?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the standard practice is to have agreements with the coachee that says, this is my practice, this is what I do, these are expectations of you, of me, resolution of any disagreements, and of course, how much it costs and stuff like that. And oftentimes, like for myself, that it's educational. Education to the best of my ability, but please, anything that you take away from our conversation is your sole responsibility. Because I can't predict how someone will take what's being said and what they'll go off and do. I mean, it's impossible to ever know that. So choices people make are their own choices. My
I might double
responsibility.
down on that. I might double down on that as well in your contract and even say, make sure you follow up with your medical provider and or PCP, whomever's managing your medical care.
Yeah.
And then also, just as I'm thinking as well, even on your email signature, put a disclaimer at the bottom there as well, using that language that you and a lawyer would work on.
Okay. Yeah, because there is a lot of education happening in the world, and everyone is well intentioned, but no one's above a mistake, right?
Correct.
So I guess the language would be to the best of my ability and knowledge. But always, I think we always have to remember that human beings and individuals we have our own free will. We can choose anything we want and make it mean something. So I think it's really good to remember that even our best intentions, somebody might not take that as intended.
Anyone can make a complaint to a board of nursing, and it's confidential in this state, so you do not get to know who the complainant is. And investigations can take up to 2 years. Now, hear me out, I had 200 to 300 cases in various different stages, right? The workflow within different places is different, and you would want a case to be worked up, but now that's 2 years of your life being strung through. If you don't think that these people are not stressed, it's
Yeah.
financially, emotionally, it's just something that you don't want in your life. So plan for the worst and hope for the best. Especially, I'm all about alternative coaching, but until some of the regulations, the rules, as far as the board of nursing, because the additional education that's obtained through certification never ever supersedes the rules or regulations dictated by your professional license ever. And I think that some nurses forget that, and then they're like, that's, that they sent me this template, or I've seen this with some of these programs where they do provide them with resources, and in some of the fine print on page 100, it says, make sure you change that so it mirrors that you're an RN, and they don't. And the stuff that they put out there, the templates and stuff that they use, got them in trouble, because then it looked like, because the board of medicine, more often than not, right, well, where those complaints will come from, because who is their duty to, and they don't, if you're in their lane, they will report you to the board of nursing and pharmacy and or what other entity that you could be violating the rules and regulations. So going back to the IV therapy, possibly compounding drugs, it takes 2 seconds to reach out to the board of pharmacy or to do some basic research just to make sure that you're aligning with what you're supposed to do as far as the rules and regulations in that state, because that is that's what governs your practice. And there's so many, there's position statements, there's rules, there's regulations, and 1514 in this state says that I have a duty to the patient that supersedes a hospital policy or a physician order, and that was passed in 1983. So position statements, we are held to as the same as rules and regulations.
This is a different topic completely, but I had an email from Canada today, and it says we're trying to develop an approach to address the need for billing access for nurse coaches and registered nurses in independent practice in general. The majority of us here in my group are certified holistic nurse coaches. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, so we're reaching out to see what has been successful and how it has been successful. And of course, then she goes on to say that the policies in the US and Canada are very different, but we have the same focus, and it's increasing accessibility to our practice and our care of our patients that we're interested in.
So their structure set up very different than ours. And we don't even have it figured out. We don't have it figured out in this country. The Commission for Reimbursement, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. If you're not, good to get connected with the Commission for Reimbursement. So they are trying to work on reimbursement codes for RNs, because it's not the same for NPs. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but they have a petition. They're speaking in front of Congress. They're really trying to move us forward. And one of those things that they're doing is trying to get us STEM designated so that we can have these other, having codes tied to us so that we can bill independently. I think California is one of the only states that does, I think, some minor RN billing. And the only thing that I know that to be around is a psychiatric med that an RN was going to give in the community. And she said she had some kind of Medicare code tied to her ability to do that. But I had never heard about that before. Like you guys know, as RNs, we that's not a thing.
Well,
How do we do nursing, say, as coaching and not worry about crossing those boundaries? How do we stay in line with our nursing practice to help people as nurse coaches?
Well, I think that you guys have hit on it multiple times. It's around the educational piece.
Right.
It's really going to be, especially as the RN. Now, if you're a nurse practitioner, that's very different. You're at liberty to do a lot more than the RN or the LPN, the naturopath, the chiropractor, any of these other modalities. But if you're an RN, you really have to stay in your scope of practice and educating the patients. You cannot be ordering labs as an RN. No, you have to be very careful when you're using that language. You and a doctor can discuss those things, but the doctor's ultimately making that decision. You might be part of the data collection and input using an SBAR form of communication with the doctor, given the assessment that you did when you spent time with the client in that recommendation format, but always within your scope. Now, could you set up things where you may have standing orders? That's a possibility, because can an RN follow said standing orders? But then you just have to be careful, because is that MD there? What's the standing order? There's just a lot of, there's a lot of room. You just have to be careful as the RN. Oftentimes, keeping it around education, and then the contracting them making sure you're writing whatever your credentialing is and that you're not misrepresenting yourself, and that you're a nurse coach and you're giving them guidance on their, food wellness journey, whatever your specific specialty is.
Well, I wondered if you could also elaborate on the STEM profession designation.
Sure. So science, technology, engineering. So it's just what we know to be STEM and math, right? That's the Homeland Security runs that. That's like academia. We are not designated under STEM. We're not designated under science, which is baffling to me. So it affects our ability to get funding as nurses, extending over into even branching over even to research into how we could bill, and the Commission for Reimbursement. And Rebecca Love talks about STEM. She's one of the nurses that's RN MSN on for sure on LinkedIn. You could follow her, but she's the one who's advocating for nurses to be designated as STEM, and speaking in front of Congress about our education and our background, and that would further branch into the possible reimbursement. But I'm getting a little bit out of my lane here, just because I do more helping nurses and advocating for nurses as it relates to profession, the regulation. So I don't want to, but those, the Commission for Reimbursement, and then Rebecca Love, and if you just look up STEM, it's they've been speaking and talking about, I believe maybe even a TED talk around our designation as nurses under STEM.
We heard an engineer talking about it, and it was his feeling that there were many similarities between nursing and engineering, and that in his opinion it should be a STEM profession.
I agree. I mean, I created a post. I spent time, my last unit was a cath lab and electrophysiology. I can assure you, I was doing a little STEM.
Maybe just a little.
And then they add art. So they add art because it was STEM. And I'm like, you're adding art and you're not going to add us? What? That seems like such a slap in the face. That did hurt my feelings. That's ugly.
Wow.
I'm so glad that you mentioned about the compact licensure, because in nurse coaching, I hear a lot about nurses that are going to start coaching on their own, and they'll say, well, I'm just not going to put the nurse coaching that I promote myself out. I'll just promote myself as a coach. And that kind of takes away that the legal part of it as falling under your license, but your license stays with you no matter what. So my thought has always been, stay in your lane with your compact license. Teresa, I've heard you say that too on Sharon's conference. And I thought, I'm so glad that you came out and said that, because I think there's a lot of nurse coaches out there that are dropping the word nurse from the coaching in their title because they think that that's the way to get around crossing over those non-compact license state lines.
You would want to be real careful with that, because you're still held to your highest level of education. And if you're giving anything other, because again, what type of coaching are you giving? Because you're not a nurse. Remember, you're not a nurse. You're a layperson, right? You're not calling yourself a nurse. So you do have to be careful. Yes, you have a bachelor's or master's of science in nursing, but 33 states have language, written law around the word and use nurse. It's a protected word in those states. So you don't get to use that word unless you're adhering to the rules and regulations as dictated by that state. So yes, that's a very valid point, and see how it gets just a little bit tricky. Some of the stuff I'm not here to tell you is right, but I'm just here to tell you the last place that you want to be is standing in front of the board of nursing and trying to defend that. I promise you. It's not always an easy thing to do. And they're going to be going over I'd never seen it before. Nothing is untouchable from boards. Nothing gets redacted. Let me say that again. Nothing gets redacted, literally.
Mm.
That's not how it works. It's untouchable. They can get whatever they want. And so it's not this in civil litigation or criminal litigation where things won't be discoverable. No, ma'am. That's not how this works at all. Nope. It's all discoverable from your social media to personal stuff to some of it. I even why that's why I'm an advocate, because I do feel like some of it does cross over into what even our constitutional rights are. But who am I going to tell? There's no oversight for boards, right? I mean, I don't want to bore you with details that I know and why I'm seeking out law school, but now you're going to ask an entity that doesn't have oversight for fairness. And only one board of nursing, North Carolina is the only board of nursing that has any just culture language written into it.
Wonder why that is. I mean, are we just not,
Nurses Association, probably. Anything that's driven, we actually do have rules and regulations that are pretty, now they're written at the graduate level, unfortunately, and they should be written at the 10th grade level like the NCLEX is. But we do have some good language, and even under the frequently asked questions we do, but that's driven by like the Texas Nurses Association and the people who are within those organizations that drove those kind of things. So I have to presume that was like the North Carolina association that asked for that, because who else would ask for that but us, right? I mean, and it should be, I think the National Council of State Boards of Nursing should look at that and adopt it. And then Lydia, another good thing that I like to tell nurses as well is to also use the decision-making framework that comes from the National Council for State Boards of Nursing. So the decision-making framework is, it's not something, for those of you who don't know, it's not something that's real lengthy or long. It's 8-9 questions. This is something at the end of my training courses, this is the last thing that I leave nurses with. And I think 7 or 8 does talk about your specific credentialing, your modality.
That's all great information. Thank you. I'm wondering, just because the coaching is still, there's certainly a lot of flurry around it now. And I know Lynn, you've been in it Teresa, have you been as long as Lynn is? See, I'm
Yeah.
just 5 years in. So, but there's a lot of activity now, than there was like 2 years ago. And so I'm just wondering if there's if we might see a surge, or is it that the board is overwhelmed with things that are brought before it, and so it maybe it's not rising to the level because there's more urgent cases that come up. I don't know. What's that like, Maggie?
Yeah, and I can't speak for the board. I'm no longer with this in this
Mhm.
entity. But some don't always go to full, there's different the process within the board. So you would get like an initial complaint
Mhm.
Or the allegation.
Mhm.
But not all of them may rise to that
Yeah.
where it actually goes through the whole process. And oftentimes nurses will sign their orders. Oftentimes nurses don't have professional liability insurance, so they don't seek out legal counsel, because the first thing I tell all nurses is that we need to call your legal counsel, because you really shouldn't be speaking to an entity without representation, because what you do or do not say can make a difference, especially when we're talking about some of these health coach, some of these maybe alternative things that the board of nursing may not understand. And now you have an investigator who's a criminal investigator, may not be a nurse investigator. So there are some nuances that are in there, right? And now, so you just need a lawyer to help you guide through that process. But tell me, are your like the bigger association, the accrediting body, do they have position statements, or what do they put stuff up about, like the use of coach and compact and those kind of things?
We haven't seen that yet. Um, one of the things that I noticed was that in the bulletin from the Texas Board of Nursing that came out this week, I saw more cases being reported as infractions than I've ever seen when it was in print. And I wonder if there really is an increase in reporting nurses. And the other thing is I am well, just thinking about something I heard on the rural healthcare I belong to. They say that practice always precedes law by 10 years. And we're exactly at that 10-year mark in regard to certified nurse coaches. This is the year.
And I don't know the actual stat of the number that's been reported. I don't know if it's in relation to health coach and coaching. But I also talked about how the governor had to overturn all in-person clinicals. Now, what I can tell you that I am seeing and hearing about is the newer nurses that are being reported and disciplined because they're the lack of education, because they didn't get the in-person clinicals. But as far as the rise, I'm not uncertain. I don't know if this is just a catch up past COVID when they didn't have it figured out with being at home, but I don't know the actual, roughly, I do believe 1,400 nurses are disciplined annually, I think as a rule in Texas, but that's a older stat. I don't know the current number. But I could not speak to whether it was related to alternative medicine, holistic, per se, but I have seen the newer I have seen an uptick in that for sure. Because they reach out to me, I'm not within this agency. I'm not a lawyer. I don't give legal advice. I'm no longer with an agency just because nurses reach out to me as an advocate in their legal teams. And I am seeing not only reported, but then even the incidents of peer reviews that is required in the state. I don't know if you ladies know that, don't want to bore you with details, but ours is one of the only states that does really have a peer review process, different from Safe Harbor, and which I think should be utilized as well. I do think it's a nurse's right to have that afforded to them prior to being reported to a board of nursing, as long as it meets the criteria, less than 5 minor, I believe can be handled within, I believe if it rises to a level of sentinel, that does have to be reported, but that you should just follow those specific guidelines as dictated by the NPA. Then I think
Welcome, Paige.
So how can we make sure that we're staying within our scope of practice? Because, it feels kind of scary to think that you can, all of these infractions. What's the good news for nurses? Like, what is it that we can do that keeps us in I know education, to the best of our knowledge and abilities and what we've learned and what we help people see about their own health, that is nursing. Nursing diagnosis. We can have as many nursing diagnoses as we want. And how
Yes,
we help
ma'am.
people heal through those, I think it's great. I mean, how many of it, we've written millions of care plans at this point. It feels like millions. And I think that's part of our nursing practice, that we can do that without fear for our license. I think I don't want people to be afraid to go out and help people, to educate people, to coach them around things that you're knowledgeable about, understanding with clarity that this is the knowledge to the best of my abilities. But as you said, if you have questions beyond that, you must follow up with your primary care provider. Talk about that just for a minute, of all the things nurses can do without crossing those boundaries.
Well, first and foremost, depending on what you're credentialing, because an LPN versus an RN, so
Yes.
LPN focused assessment, RN scope is a little bit different, nurse practitioner, so always staying within your lane. But yes, care plans. Now the LPN cannot create a nursing diagnoses. And I'd never like to discriminate. I like to include all nurses. So if an LPN chooses to do holistic, I'm not sure if that's an option. But they would just want to be very careful with that. They do not create care plans. They can be delegated tasks. So, but the RN and above absolutely create, that's a great tool. That's an amazing tool. And then that's what you're falling back on. NANDA supports that. All your evidence-based science, everything, there's no shortage of, our ability to do that. So that is essential. And then on top of that, what do we do with all that? Education, education, education. Because that's basically you're, implementing the care plan, and then you're educating, following up, and then making sure that you are documenting that stuff as well in an organized fashion, whatever it is that you're doing, to keep record of that. And I don't, just like you said, Teresa, I don't want people to be scared. I don't. And I, like you, there are plenty of things that we can do, that we are doing, making sure that you're taking guidance from the accrediting bodies, that you're following those guidance. If they're saying as a health coach, this is the language or the stuff that you can do, just making sure that you understand that if you have questions, they have consultants at the boards as well. It's not all scary. It's not all investigative. They will work with you, right? And I would rather you do that than them send you a letter. Just reach out and just say, hey, I am an RN, an NP, an LPN, and this is what I'm doing. Can I get just a little bit of guidance? This is what I got from the program that I took. This is what, the language, this is what I'm going to be giving my clients. Does this meet the scope of practice? I sat down with a lawyer. What are your thoughts on that? And there's another layer of protection for you. But just touching on the stuff that we talked about as well, staying within your lane, not providing informed consent unless you're, an LIP. And then just like you said, there are plenty of things that we already do around education. I don't want you to be scared. If you have all this stuff in place, then why are you scared? You're already compliant. You're already doing the things that you know that you're supposed to do. You're staying in your lane, and you shouldn't be fearful.
Yeah. Because I do know that nurse coaching is shining a light on what nurses do. The care, the compassion, the informed knowing, our ability to connect with other human beings. And we want the patient themselves to have their own power. It's not us doing something for them. It's allowing a person the space to figure out what they want for themselves, how they want to get there, what they want to do. And holding that container for someone is incredibly powerful in the health and healing journey. And truly living a life that is full of, peace and love and joy, these places where, when we talk about all of the ain't it awful things in the world, nurses come in and say, no, it's going to be okay. Really, trust me, And I think we're champions of the human spirit. We're champions of people living a good life. And I think education and allowing someone that space to hear themselves think, that's nursing. That's what nurses do.
Yeah.
How many times do we talk to a patient and they, I don't work in the hospital anymore, but I had more than one patient, several hundred patients probably over the years. What should I do? How, what decisions should I make? And I could never give them that answer, but I could allow them to hear what their true heart was telling them. And I think that's one of the places where I don't think we ever think about that as the essence of nursing. Well, a lot of people do. I shouldn't say that. That's not true. I guess I kind of lost my train of thought because I was thinking of how that would relate into what you're talking about of staying within our scope and standards of practice. But I think anything that has to do with the human spirit truly is nursing.
And then doubling down on that. So on your mission statement, on your website, all that beautiful stuff that you just said. So then it's no mystery front facing what the patient or the client was signing up for, but even using some of that language, because if you're really doing coaching, why are you calling them a patient?
Right.
So making sure that your language mirrors that as well, whatever your relationship is with that person. Because as a coach, or are they a client or a patient?
Yeah, always a client for me.
So,
You know, a patient is in the hospital is kind of how I think about it in my mind. But you're a human being first. You know, that's the part of us that's like,
that's why they're seeking you out as opposed to, right? I mean, the traditional medicine situation, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah,
and as long as all your front facing stuff shows that, and they knew what they were signing up for, right there. And you said, you know, make sure if you're stopping your labetalol, you got to make sure you let the cardiologist know that's something that you make a decision with the cardiologist. Yes, I'm all about diet, exercise. You need to do all of those. But as far as you stopping your labetalol, that's not something that I can, you know, as the RN, even as the NP, because that doctor has already made that decision for you. You need to make sure that you're just following that up with the provider and then documenting that.
yeah, yeah. And so I think it will really matter where you're doing your coaching at as
Yes.
well. Whether you're in a clinic, at a hospital, in private practice, I think it's going to be very important that we pick like around our interests of what we want to coach around, and then making sure we're staying within our scope of practice to do that. I think
Yeah.
that for me, in my mind, that's a better way to really limit your liability, but also really serve your people.
Right, right. Because they're coming to you for a reason. You're very valid in that. And as
Mhm.
long as you're not misrepresenting any of that, and then just saying yes, you know, and so the other thing as well you might want to think about, because if they don't have a doctor and they're saying, yeah, I have all these medical conditions, and you're an RN, you know what I mean? You just would want to be careful
I
because
never, I'm sorry, I can't tell you anything about that. I know you need to go to your doctor.
yes, I mean, you cannot be giving them any medical advice. If
Mm-mm.
they come with all these comorbidities and say they have, you know, sleep apnea and they want to lose weight, absolutely. We can talk about this stuff, you know, diet, exercise, as long as you're giving education about that. And you need to go see a doctor and making sure you're documenting that as well.
Yeah, yeah, I'm recommended to follow up with primary care or
Yeah.
something. Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been really helpful. I think it's inspiring to really kind of talk about the things we never talk about, you know?
Well, as well, just not only as holistic, but then when the other level is being an entrepreneur. When you're a nurse business owner, you do incur some responsibilities as well. So just making sure, you know, now you're a nurse and a business owner. Now you own the practice, and now possibly you have other people working for you as well. So just being careful. And I don't want to go down a whole nother rabbit hole, but delegation, having unlicensed, licensed people working for you. An MA is very different than an LPN. An MA, right, falls, you know, under more often than not the physician, the LIP taking direction. The LPN is licensed, the RN is licensed and has their own independent practice.
Very cool. Thank you very much.
Well, I see Paige has turned on her video. Do you have a question for us, Paige?
No, I'm sorry. I wasn't really, I had the phone kind of off on the side of the charger and I was watching it. So I apologize for not being in here, but so no, just was joining you guys.
Thanks for joining us.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for this topic. It's so timely because I have been doing some coaching, but I don't think about the documentation a lot. Of course, I'm not doing it as a nurse. So, but so it's really got me thinking about what I need to start and put into practice.
Right. And me even, you know, because again, coaching, you know, what's the requirement when you coach about document? Because I don't know this, and this is an honest question. You know, what's the guidance from your, you know, education? If you're calling them a client, do you document?
Yeah, for my health and wellness coaching certification, you know, we just we all take notes because we're working with somebody on a plan, but there's never necessarily anybody we have to turn that into, even as a certified health and wellness coach. I'm not,
Right. But see,
you know,
my thing would be,
dietitian.
so if one of your clients reports you, unfortunately, for whatever reason, right? So then now because you are an RN, right? I do see you're an RN. Now you're standing in front of the board of nursing, because that's, you know, and talking about your coaching, because this person was saying you're acting outside your scope.
Right.
And then now you do have just a little bit of layer of protection, because you have some documentation, because it's 2 years from now, it's 6 months, it's 7 months.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even a minor recollection of things that you would be able to produce, but then just making sure that you're just all like HIPAA compliant, all those words, just whenever you're keeping any kind of record collection, right? Because you just have to make sure you're maintaining that level, just to add on another level. But why even just seeking out legal counsel? I think Legal Shield, and I have no plug, not plugging them. I'm not saying, that is a resource that I know, I think that we've talked about. It's a great affordable resource that I think that people have used to maybe look at like a contract or maybe something to help. But, even if you paid a lawyer maybe a couple $100, just a one-time, hey, will you just look at what do you think about, if I document as a health coach like this, and I keep it, on this laptop in a safe in my house, then am I okay? You know what I mean? Or whatever it is that you're doing, whatever your level
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I know that there are so many different dashboards and content management systems that people use for their notes, but most of them are kind of handwritten. So yeah,
And there's nothing wrong with
all
that.
great.
There's no, unless you bill for medical insurance, I don't believe that there's a requirement for like EMR documentation. I do believe and I'm speaking a little bit out of turn, but I do believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, that if you have a practice and you don't use an EHR, isn't there a level of like fine or something that Medicaid, Medicare, I think does tie to you because you're choosing to use like paper? Again, I'm not 100% sure, but it is acceptable for you to use paper if you wanted to. It's not because you're as a coach and not because you're not billing medical insurance.
Well, and I'm also exceptionally clear that I am not an RN health and wellness coach. I'm not a nurse health and wellness coach. I am like, it's on everything that I have or that I put out, is that, I'm certified through these bodies, not a nurse. So I don't know that an EHR is applicable.
No, it's
And and I don't know how the rules kind of work for really small, independent coaches and things. So maybe Teresa and Lynn know those things better
Well,
as far as using an EHR.
it's something that is very definitely necessary for any entity that bills for insurance coverage. So doctor's office, dentist's office do have to have electronic health records. I have not heard about it at all in regard to nurses. Have you, Teresa?
No, I know that there's some places where there's documentation that's necessary, and of course you keep notes with your clients so that you know where you've been with them. But like you said, I keep mine in a password protected folder, and I only use it just to remember what we've talked about. I assume that that's, to my knowledge, that's what's required. I do know there's things like platforms like Practice Better that have HIPAA compliant places to document and upload forms and do a little bit more robust documentation. But a lot of times, I think I keep minimal notes because this is the client's journey. This is where they get to be free to expand and learn what they need to learn for themselves. But I don't do specific health coaching either. I'm not coaching on a condition or any of that. If it's out of my scope, I recommend they go see their primary care and get clearance to do that, because I'm not a doctor and I'm not working with a clinic. So I try to be very clear that I'm staying in my lane of education is what I've chosen to do. Educating and really truly just on the one topic that we talk about. So in
Yeah.
that way, I guess I'm niched down into talking about how thought works as it relates to you and what that means for you.
Right. And I think it would just come to, are you calling them a client, to Paige's point? Are you calling them a client or a patient? Because if you're not developing a nurse-patient relationship, then right, your level of the EHR doesn't exist because you're not billing for medical services.
Right?
Now, if you're calling them like a client and you're a health coach, maybe a good idea to keep notes just because again,
Mhm.
right, I always think, because have I seen people get reported? I would love to tell you that I haven't, but not necessarily as a health coach, right? I
Right.
can't honestly say outside of the ones that were, it was IV therapy stuff, really what it was around. And medication, prescribing, interpreting labs, giving recommendations for labs as RNs, like we can't do those type of things.
No, I didn't, and we
Yeah.
do none of that. So,
So I think that
um,
again, as long as you're discriminating yourself to Paige's point where, this is not a nurse-patient relationship,
no,
right? I'm a coach. And so therefore, right, I don't have to have any responsibility to provide any medical documentation because there's not a patient relationship.
no patient relationship at all. But I know that people do. So I think you're right. I think it's good for us to know that and
Well-
put those protections in place for yourself.
Well, and I was talking to a friend who is a therapist the other day, and because I do have some certifications, um, that's one of the areas I've kind of looked into is making sure where I cross into coaching versus therapy, because they're very different, but having the ability to do both and get more likely to get certification as a therapist long before a nurse coach. So, but you still don't have EHRs if you're an independent mental health therapist. So, I mean, they just don't really exist for those practitioners at this
So
time.
if they get, so if they were to get investigated, I'm sure they just produce well, and again, I don't even know what that looks like. I'm totally out of my lane here because again, I don't know.
They do have HIPAA compliant platforms. They're just not called EHRs. They're
Yeah,
content management systems
sure.
that have that. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess, yes, if there was a patient relationship, there would have to be some form of documentation, right, for therapy and stuff, but you would for sure want to make sure you follow all those rules and regulations. I just get, I always think about the worst case scenario. To Teresa's point, I don't want to scare people. I mean, maybe just a little bit, right? Scared straight. We've all seen this, right? I mean, come on.
Well, I think it's good for us to know when we're staying in our lane and how to do that. And I think nurse coaching is really evolving. More people are getting into it, and I think we have to have the conversations so that we can put those I'm going to call them boundaries in place, so that we take care of our clients the best way we possibly know how within our scope of practice.
Yes.
I didn't go to medical school because I wanted to be a nurse, and so I think we're still defining our practice, and I think these conversations are key to doing that.
I agree. And
Yeah.
then I think that maybe some between, all of us, making sure that, if you can go down and give testimony when there's any kind of stuff happening, when sunset comes up, when there's language that needs to be adopted, maybe speaking to Texas Nurses Association, the ANA, any of these big associations. And I don't want to skip over any one state of, anyone other in the United States is listening, your nurses association, they have lobbyists. So this is some of the stuff that, you guys could take, and they have lobbyists, they have lawyers who will go, because these are things that need to be addressed, and maybe in a position statement, maybe in, not necessarily they're going to define out a rule or a regulation, but maybe adopt some language around some of these alternative types of nursing, because we are doing so much more. I mean, think about the degrees from like the 90s till now even. I mean, we just do so many things, and just like Lynn was saying, it takes what, 10 years for stuff to catch up. So I just don't want anyone to get caught up into that while this is still evolving.
That's really interesting. The nurse practitioners started in 1967, and they now number more than 101,000 nurse practitioners over the last 50 years. It's just been, an exponential growth because of the need for care. Well, thank you so much. Teresa, do you want to just make the announcement one more time?
Yep, I want everyone to save the date, November 8th and 9th, 2024, in case you're watching this in the future. We're having a retreat for American Holistic Nurses, Centex, and Austin area chapters together. We're actually one and the same, we just have two names, but it will be in Mineral Wells. Get signed up in Nursing Network and follow the Austin area AHNA to get the emails, or you can find us on Facebook under AHNA Austin Area Collaborative, and you can request to join that group, or you can come to nursecoaching.com and say, hey, I saw you, and drop us a message in our contact form, and we'll help you get signed up in the right place. But I encourage you, if you're even thinking about it, to sign up early, because there are really only 50 places available because it's a small hotel. But it's going to be very exciting, and Dr. Darlene Hess will be our keynote. Some of you may know her as the lead author on the Art and Science of Nurse Coaching, and she is a wealth of information. So looking forward to all of that. And Maggie, just thank you so much for your knowledge. Anyone who wants to get in contact with her, do you want to drop your contact information in there just in case someone
Yes, of course. Yes.
would like to get in touch with you for any reason, and maybe tell them where they can find you if they're just watching the video and they can type your name in?
Sure. So all my stuff is Advocates with an S for Nurses. Advocates for Nurses. I have it's a stethoscope with a heart, and Lady Justice is the, just so you have an idea what maybe the logo is. It's blue and red, and then I'm going to put it in here. It's Advocates number 40 or FOR.com. And then I'll drop my email in here as well. And so it's Maggie Ortiz. Please follow me on LinkedIn as well. Some of the groups I referenced, the Commission for Reimbursement, Rebecca Love, and STEM and all that stuff. That's for sure on. You can find that on LinkedIn, and I highly encourage, especially for if we want real change. Not all of us can do it. And if there are other nurses that are willing to advocate, even if we put our name on a petition or help sign some of the stuff, you know what I mean? It does really make change for us. So on LinkedIn, on every social media platform you could think of, I do videos because, again, I want to keep nurses away from any type of, getting in trouble. So I do have the largest following is TikTok. I didn't ask for that. It just happened. So I am all over these social media platforms, and anytime there's something going down at the Capitol and you guys want to come down and scream and yell to get some stuff changed, call me. I'll meet you down there. We sometimes have to remind them it's our house, not theirs.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for being here, and appreciate your time. And I loved getting to know you the other day, and we're still in the circle here. So we'll be back around. I hope you'll join us again, and everyone have a really good night.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you so much.
See ya.
Absolutely.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.